My name is BlizzTank, and today we're going to be talking about the Team Fortress 2 competitive community, as well as competitive communities as a whole. This is going to be live and unscripted, so I hope you enjoy it. If not, I guess just leave your thoughts down below in the comments section. There's going to be 1,000 wrong ways to put this, and only a few right ways. So I'm just going to speak my mind and let it stand. Competitive gaming is a wonderful thing. It's a way to take your skills and all the practice and time you've invested into a game to the next level. It's a way to entirely change the way you think about a game. You get to meet new people through it, you get to meet new friends, and you can establish many long-term connections from the shared interests. I've met some of my best friends online through competitive, and I'm not sure I'd recommend it to any friends or anybody. The biggest thing I'd like to point out today is that competitive, for all its good graces, for all it's given me, it's also taken so much away from my emotional well-being over the years of playing. And I feel like this probably applies to other games competitively as well. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into it. The biggest issue competitive games face is the social standards that tend to be set in, especially in the niche and more older competitive games. Once you stop getting official developer support, and there isn't really any esports scene or anything like that, good behavior doesn't end up really being rewarded, while bad behavior tends to be rewarded by the very people who partake in that sort of behavior, who harm others, who go out of their way to harass and cause issues, and drive out any positive influences on the community. And that's how you end up seeing slurs racially and transphobically being used as frequently as they are, and a complete disregard for the emotional well-being of others. This is something I've seen a lot in the North American Highlander scene, but I'm also aware of it exists in every other region that Team Fortress 2 is competitively played in. And I feel like it's something a lot of people aren't comfortable coming forward about, and whenever they do come forward about it, nothing really changes from it. Maybe one or two or three people get banned, maybe the people directly involved and responsible for it, but what about all the people that enable them, that make them feel welcome in the scene, that just turn an eye and act all innocent while these things happen? They, st- they still end up being present in the community, they still end up inadvertently harming others. And this comes down to it just being seen as acceptable, and I don't think that's alright. I think that these issues have been present in the competitive scene and probably in the scenes of other games for a long time, and the longer these things are allowed to be present for and be seen as acceptable, the more widespread of issues they're going to become, and the more welcomed these sorts of influences are going to be on the community. And I think it's very important for the community to unite and drive out any of these harmful presences once they make themselves clear. And I don't think that ends up being the case. What ends up happening most of the time is that you put effort in, you overextend yourself so much as an individual, you hope others come forward to help you as well. While you do community groups or you volunteer as an admin to try and tackle these issues. And what ends up happening is that you draw the ire of a few of these people. I'm not going to name names out of respect. I don't want others being harassed for any of this. And I don't think going into specifics is going to really solve anything here with how widespread across most scenes that this sort of behavior is. I think a lot of this comes down to people just not really caring about the community of a game. It's just like, oh, I'm just playing this game to relax and have fun. But you don't always have the option to just ignore this sort of behavior, not when it directly involves you or the people you care about and are supposed to be friends with. You don't always just have the option to be unaware of things. And I think being a part of a community and caring about it means putting in the effort and potentially hurting yourself as well for the sake of others. I don't think, at least speaking long term, that you should really just choose to not care about community. I think if you've stuck with a game long enough, if you stuck with a community long enough, you've formed friendships within that scene, and you want to see those people benefit from the time they're spending, not get hurt or feel unwelcomed and get chased out of the game that they've spent so much time on and love. I've seen so many staff members, friends, and just generally speaking, positive community influences like people who do pug groups, for instance, just get chased out of the community because they end up inconveniencing the few people who instigate these behaviors and who get defended by others for it. And I just don't see why that should continue or why it should be allowed to continue. Nobody really benefits from it besides the few people who go out of their way to instigate that sort of behavior. You think you benefit from it now with by remaining friends with that person, supporting their actions, and then you do something they disagree with in the future and they turn their backs on you. That's not really any sort of meaningful friendship. That's not something you should preserve. Instead, you should be trying to preserve the community as a whole and prevent others from being hurt while you're a part of it. That's your obligation as a member of a community. I don't think that's very complicated to explain. And I think it's something that should be accepted as a standard rather than an exception. And there's always going to be people who try and help you, who try and help you get through it, who try and defend you. But it just never ends up being enough. You draw the ire of one person, and then you draw the eye of their entire group because, I don't know, I guess change is inconvenient for them. I guess things remaining the way they are is just better for them. Why? I guess change scares people. They don't want it to change. They like things how they are now. They like having their friends. They're scared of just losing that friendship. And I understand that, but at the same time, you have to put your own state aside for the sake of others from time to time. I don't think anybody wants others to be harassed or bothered that much. It's just they end up not being aware of the harm that they're causing with an action, or just by blindly supporting their friends' actions. I think a lot of this does just come down to unawareness, but it's an issue all the same that needs to be resolved. I'm going to speak from my personal experiences here. I've done many community groups. I've been biased in my past community groups. I don't regret doing the community groups. I put a lot of effort and care into them. I tried to resolve some of these influences. I might not have been entirely fair with my judgment and decisions, but I don't think it warrants having personal information be leaked and being harassed from the very people by the very people you're trying to protect. You can't really defend a community if the very community you're trying to defend turns their backs on you when it's no longer convenient to them. What usually ends up happening is you take care of one person who goes out of the way to instigate negative behavior from others and ends up hurting the community, and then all their friends just dogpile on you. And what do you do to that? Do you just ban their friends for it as well? That's not very fair. That doesn't really get you anywhere. That just gets the friends of the friends upset. Do you just ignore it? Sure, that's the easiest thing to do, but those people don't just go away. They keep bothering you until they get their way for months, for weeks, for as long as it takes. And the people you ban in the first place, well, they'll just go out of their way to use alternate accounts to try and circumvent any sort of measure you take, be that in banning and blocking them. And if they don't target you yourself, they're going to end up targeting your friends. If you're an owner of a community group or an admin, they're going to end up bothering your other admins or staff members over it. And that's not fair to the community members who are putting all their time in, who are putting all this effort in, and are opening them up, themselves up to a lot of potential emotional pain. And a lot of it, it's stuff you can just brush off, sure, but after enough time, it wears you down. Nobody can really deal with just constant messages and walls of text from all of these different people, from all of these different sources, for months on end without a break. You try and take a step back and enjoy your personal life. You try and just enjoy yourself with your friends online, or just enjoy your presence in the group. It just follows you wherever you go online. You bring a phone with you on person, don't want to turn off notifications or anything like that, you'll just have that following around you forever. And the people who are doing that, they don't care. I'll never understand why not, but they just want to get their way. They just get all unreasonable when it affects their friends. And that can end up being really, really harmful to you and to your own friends. There isn't really any good way to deal with it. You can try and raise awareness, but if they don't want to listen to the answers you're going to give them, then you can't really do anything about that. And I think that's the biggest reason why we see so much admin burnout and staff burnout for leagues like RGL as a whole. People that work for RGL, they've made a lot of questionable decisions. I don't agree with a lot of their decisions, but they're also just caring people and volunteers all the same. And when they see all that drama, the people blaming them for all of the game's issues, well, it just gets overwhelming. At a certain amount of time, like at a certain point, you just get tired of just getting all this shit for the people you're trying to care about, who you're trying to help and protect. And it's just not sustainable. It's never going to be sustainable unless the community as a whole shifts their perspective and tries to help solve issues rather than just keep causing issues. And that doesn't really sound like a meaningful statement on paper, but a lot of these people in community groups, they just go out of their way to cause issues and destroy it. They don't know first thing about creating. They just want to circle jerk and cause you issues if they won't get their way. A lot of this comes down to enabling. You'll have these younger individuals who just prosper off of any attention they get. They end up surrounding themselves with a bad crowd. You try and help them change from that, but if you let them into the group, if you try and help them, then they just end up relapsing and throwing themselves back into that spot. And I don't think they entirely understand the situation ever. And I don't think there's really an easy way to convey that to them. Once they end up enjoying that sort of attention, it's not very easy to just take that away from them and try and help them to develop more positively. And again, I'm not going to name names here, but there's one individual I can think of. He's a bit of a troubled young man. And he's done so many harmful things just to get the attention and stay in the spotlight of these people who don't like him as a person and who just harass him and surround him because they think it's funny. And these people, if you ban them from your group, if you do anything against them, then they target you, and all of their friends just start to dogpile on you. And that just shouldn't be accepted. Like, I, I don't think it's something that really has to be said. It's just not something good. Like, it sounds all fun and all, but then it has an actual impact on people's lives. At the very least, with how they socialize online, and in a time like this, with quarantine going on, with COVID being how it is, the Delta variant picking up, a lot of people's contact is going to end up being online, and some are even getting their education online. And it's just sad to see. People don't think it does any harm until it harms them personally. And I think the saddest part of all of that is that a decent bit of the time they don't even realize that it's hurting them. They just get content with it. They enjoy having their friends with whatever standards those friends have and enjoy the times while they're good. This has been a lot of words to explain something I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say here. It's just sort of been a loose collection of my thoughts. But I feel like maybe just being upfront about this, being honest about it, and sharing some of the experiences I've seen with others, maybe that could change things a bit. And it probably won't, but to have a successful community, it means you just have to try and do these things. You have to try and care, even if others don't, no matter how much it's going to inconvenience or hurt you. You just have to keep trying, because if you don't try, who will? I think it's really admirable how staff members of leagues like Recharge Gaming League devote so much of their time and free will to a community that just doesn't respect them in the slightest and gives them so much shit off of any mistakes they do make, and then who barely give a fuck if they do anything right. If anything gets done right, it's just maybe one positive thread or no thread. Which, I mean, it's good, I guess. No negative publicity, but it's just like, again, like, any negative behavior in this community is rewarded. All this dogpiling onto people, and it doesn't solve anything, it just hurts people, pushes them away from the community they care about. And then there's, as time goes on, less and less people care about the community. But I guess that's too much foresight to apply. And positive behavior is just a thing, I guess. It isn't something that should have to be rewarded, and I feel like maybe that's a large part of the reason why we see so many negative behaviors within the community and so many negative influences. Now, I guess that might sound a bit contradictory to what I just said, but sometimes when you're putting all that effort in, when you're just overextending yourself that much for a game that isn't even supported anymore, for like such a small competitive community that seeks to drive you away to every physical opportunity, just having a little bit of encouragement and goodwill directed towards you can mean so much. But, you know, it's there's so many more opportunities that get open to you by just accepting things as how they are and supporting these negative behaviors, like harassing others or just generally driving people out of the community if they disagree with you. It's just how you climb up the divisions. You just show that you don't have any social standards, that you don't care, because that's what it takes to get to the top, I guess. And I guess that's it. I don't think this is something that's really going to change, but maybe this perspective will help others feel a bit better about their situation and make them feel like they're not alone in what they experience from in the community. Or maybe if others aren't aware of it, of the sort of harm that comes from these communities, maybe they'll be a bit more aware of it and just a bit more prepared for what they might experience. And it really sucks. I've spent so much time on this game. I've played it competitively since 2016. I've played it overall since 2007. And I've seen so many friends just completely lose all the passion and care they have about the scene due to how they're treating it. And when you don't get support from the developers, all you really have is passion. But now all you really see is just people who are here to be here, I guess. People who don't really have anything to lose, or like anything really better to do with their time with as a result of quarantine and just not really having as much to do. It's just like people don't care enough these days about communities in general. They just reside in them. They just treat them like they're something expendable, but they're not. Once you have a good community, a good influence on the scene, you get so inspired. You see things so differently. You see maybe there's a hope for this game in the future. Maybe it can grow. Maybe things can change. And then that influence just ends up getting chased away and just no longer having the will or care to put effort in. And things just stagnate, stay the same, and eventually decline. And there's been a lot of sentiments like that in the past, but I feel like it's just been becoming all the more of an issue recently, or at least that's what running community groups would imply to me. And I just hate to see that happen to this game that I love so much. And I think even if it's a bit too late for this game's scene, even if these issues are too entrenched here, maybe a lot of this could be learned from and applied to other games to prevent them from suffering a similar fate. It takes so many days and hours to create a good community, to create anything good, really. And just a few bad influences or days to tear it away. And I think this is a large part of the reason why we see so many bad community groups rise up that just support these entrenched behaviors, and why we see any good ones just wither away so quickly. All it takes is just the owner stepping down and another person without their vision taking over. Or even then, just enough of the negative influences seeping through. And I feel like you'd usually expect negative influences to be outweighed by positive ones, right? Like, at the very least, you'd expect neutral behavior to be the norm, but I just don't think that's the case in this community, or probably in most online communities. Because it's like, if you end up getting a lot more in the way of connections, if you actually progress by acting negatively, if that's what's essentially rewarded to you, then why would you put the effort in to act positively, or at least not inconvenience others? More than that, I think that it's just time for me to move on from the competitive Fortress 2 community, competitively speaking at least. I think going forward, it's going to be a lot healthier for me to focus on other communities and how I might be able to grow and learn from them. I feel like I've kind of learned lessons to be learned here, and I just don't think there's any sense in sticking around any longer. And it's never an easy decision to make, but it's a necessary one all the same at some point. More than anything else, though, I just wish we would see more people caring and less just sort of neutral, whatever happens, happens approaches. As, as I said earlier, it's just like, sure, it's cool to not care and all, but what about once what happens once it starts affecting you negatively? Do you get the choice to ignore it then? Do you still feel so confidently and good about it then? I just don't see the point in indifference. I think you either need to commit to caring about community and improving it, or you might as well just be leaving the community at that point. I don't think there's any sense in sticking around if all you can muster up is just a sorry sense of apathy that ends up making things so much worse for the community as a whole as time goes on. And I guess to some people it's just the not to some, to most, I guess it's just the norm. They've seen things be so similar for so long when it comes to these standards. And they've played this game and seen it stagnate for so long, and I guess That's just something that should be accepted. And I can't begin to disagree with that sentiment. I think that very sentiment is how things just entrench the way they have, and how they get entrenched in other communities. So, to get back to an earlier point I was making before I went off onto a different tangent, negative behavior is expected, I guess, when you don't really have a reason to act positively. So, to get back to what I was trying to say earlier, positive activity is its own reward. It always is. It always has been. It always will be. Positive behavior is just something that should be met with similar sorts of positivity and effort and care being put in by the other person. That's how you get sustainable communities. And that's how you get people who genuinely want to be around each other and who just tolerate each other. A lot of the social groups in TF2 just sort of loathe each other's guts rather. And that just makes things even worse than they are already. This sort of wave of indifference and apathy, besides those within your small little circle, just doesn't help anything. I'll never understand why people do it, but people do it all the same. And I guess that's why I don't really fit into any in the scene. And when positive behavior isn't met with any sort of reinforcement, and negative behavior is met with positive reinforcement, well, it's not exactly hard to see why things become the way they are, and why standards just get set so low. Community efforts are community members are obligated to put that sort of care in, but unless they want to see things just decline over time. And I guess that sort of feeling of obligation is typically lacked within a community. In fact, it's probably just not very supported by our society as a whole these days. This has been a lot of words, and I think the important takeaway here is if you want others to care, if you want things to work out, then you have to care yourself. You can't expect others to care if you just don't care, if you don't want to put the effort in to see things change. You just can't be content with a status quo where nobody's really benefited besides the people who just go out of their way to hurt others. Nobody really benefits from that. And there's just not much point to it long term, even if it seems all cool and beneficial and not harmful short term. Yeah, I guess that's the whole point I'm trying to reach for here. You just have to care. The people who go out of their way to harass others, they certainly care. And that might sound wrong, but think about this. Think about all the satisfaction they get out of causing others issues, be it intentional or due to some of their own mental issues they have and the need to sort of equalize that and take that out on others. Think of how much satisfaction they get, and think of how welcoming it feels to have that sort of sentiment be mirrored in others. For these things like trolling, for lack of a better term, which really doesn't do it justice, to be seen as good or acceptable. I know I've done a lot of repeating myself here, and I'm just trying to keep it real. I understand that that might be a bit jarring or a bit seemingly pointless, but I feel like that's the approach you have to take with these things. I don't think any amount of scripting does these things justice. I don't think it's any good to just put on an act. I think all you can do is just speak your mind until you can't speak anymore and hope others learn a bit from it. And if you agree with that, cool, we'll probably make more stuff like this in the future. If you don't, then just don't watch it, I guess, yeah. Have a good one. Thank you for your time. All of that being said, though, I would actually like to return to one underlying theme here. A lot of the time, this stuff is just seen as sorts of banter, of just in-game expressions, right? Of just cute community drama that's just good for entertainment, but it's not. At a certain point, you have to draw the line and just think to yourself, is this going to actually impact others? And you need to hold others accountable to how they behave within the community, because it's going to affect people, whether you're aware of it or not. And it's so important to just be able to try and put yourself into the perspective of others and think about how you might be hurting them or helping them with your every action within the community. When people don't have that much else to go to, or feel like a community is their home, like with the team, with like a competitive community such as Team Fortress 2's, making them be able to feel welcomed and know that they have people that they can just be themselves around without having to worry about anything like bad they do being taken advantage of, any mistakes they do being taken advantage of, rather. It makes such a big difference mentally speaking, especially with how common mental troubles are at the moment, of how people just are so anxious, uncertain, and generally just depressed, dejected, and demoralized with how modern society and culture is. And my proof of that would be, well, myself, I guess, and some other female friends I have, and the person I was talking about earlier. That person has been messed up so badly by these people, and he thinks that it's completely okay to just act out like that to get that attention, to put himself in those positions where he's going to be harassing others and hurting himself and getting harassed himself, and the cycle just goes on because nobody says, okay, this is where it has to stop. And when you do try and step in and try and set things straight, you just get ostracized for it because, oh, look at this. This is just harmless fun. Or, oh, I like this attention. This person is just being way too strict and serious. And these sentiments just grow deeper and deeper with time, and the negative blowback is always greater than any sort of positive blowback you get. And that's just how things are, and things just shouldn't be like that. But I guess that's just what people want sometimes, huh? They just don't want telling others what they can and can't do, especially when it's within a competitive community or just a gaming community. It's just a gaming community. No harm comes from it, right? Uh, doesn't really sound so good when you can actually think of how it might harm others, does it? I I wouldn't think so. But that's just a small look into the mirror. I'm sure you can look around better for yourself and not need for it to be told to you. Regardless, I think it's so important to be able to be upfront and share your perspective about these things and allow others to try and build their perspectives off of it and just try and find common ground to be able to agree upon how things can be improved, how things can change. It seems the tunnel seems all dark until you come out the other side of it and find out that there's other people there who think the same things and who want to try and see the same change that you've spent all this time on. And as fun as it would be to just ignore these things and treat them like they don't impact anything, unfortunately they do. And for some people, it has a real impact on their mental state, and especially for the younger players, which there's a lot of with this community. All the memes, and I, the pedo ones, could tell you that much. And a lot of these people are very impressionable. And what happens when they see all these things as acceptable, when they see all that negative behavior being rewarded, is that they begin to apply that to other matters in their life, and they begin to act out to receive that same sort of attention and response that they do in Team Fortress 2 and online in general. And at some point, that has to stop because things just can't go on like that forever. At some point, somebody has to change things. And that can be you, that can be me, that can be all of us. If we just try and we care and we stop turning a blind eye to these things. The underlying theme here is that it's a lot easier to destroy something, to take away from it, to teach, to impart negative lessons upon someone than it is to cultivate something good, something that people benefit from. And it's your job as a community member to try and help cultivate that as a person in general. Because if you have some degree of empathy and ability to care for others, you don't want to end up seeing them be hurt or go out of their way to hurt others in the future, no matter what the context is or if it's some sort of a joke or not. If a joke hurts others, then it's not funny. Rather, it's not a joke in the first place. Well, these things are just seen as harmless. And what does any of that accomplish? What does any of this accomplish? All I can ask, all anybody can ask, is that you just do your part and try and be there for others and help them grow into the better people they want to be in the future going forward. I can't ask you to go out of your way to hurt yourself in a community that doesn't even care in the first place. I can't ask you to change. I can't ask you to try and make others change, but I think it's important for you to still like try and help others become aware because a lot of these things at the end of the day do come down to being issues of awareness. And as long as you're helping to make others aware of these things and being vocal and speaking your mind and putting effort in, others are going to start to notice on that, and you're going to end up being able to reverse the tide of some of these very harmful negative sentiments that have thoroughly set in at this point. And even if not, at least you can say that you've tried and you can live with that. And you can reflect on that positively in the future years of your life. If none of this had any significance, we'd be having a much different discussion today, and I think we'd see things turn out a lot differently than they do. I think it's a simple truth of the matter, no matter how you want to spin it. And I think that's something we should think about and try and turn into something that helps people develop rather than hurt them. If to be in a competitive community, you have to just hurt yourself in the short term and hurt your potential growth of yourself in the long term, what's the point of it? It's not healthy in that case. It's just an addiction. And that can seriously bleed into your life. It can seriously affect your emotional state, whether you're aware of it or not. I guess what I'm trying to say is do your part, be a good friend and be there for others, and hope others do their parts. Because if they do, things will genuinely change. And that's something you can have hope about and feel optimistic over, above all else. It's very easy to see these things and just feel so dejected and depressed about it, but that doesn't end up changing anything, and that just makes things so much worse to yourself. So I ask you, what's the point in doing that, compared to just knowing it's time to move on, or trying to change things? And if trying to change things still doesn't work out, you might as well just move on and try and focus on something in life that you will get genuine enjoyment out of. I guarantee you that if you can't enjoy the community for how it is, then you're not going to be able to enjoy playing it competitively. You might think that you are, but I believe that in that case, you're lying to yourself and you're putting yourself through a potential lot of pain that you're just not not realizing. And I think that underlying idea goes a lot into why we have so many people with mental and emotional damage these days. We just like to accept truths, or what seem to be the truth, or things that seem to be truths, because it makes us feel better about things. It's better to just ignore the pain, right? To just act like it isn't there. To just lie to ourselves and send ourselves the message that these things are fine, I feel fine. And then one day you just stop being able to lie to yourself like that. But there's no point in wallowing in it either, of that realization. All you can do is just do your best and move on. And I think it's about time you ask yourselves that same question. If you don't ask yourselves that sort of question, nobody else is going to. And you're gonna keep yourself in that sort of mental rut you feel. And if you're not currently stuck in that rut, you'll end up being caught in that rut eventually, where you just start questioning about your social identity, where you start having conflicts between trying to fit in and trying to maintain your own individuality when faced with these harmful groups. And sometimes it just feels better to lower your own standards to just accept these things because that's how you fit in. That's how you move up and get into the better, higher division friend circles, which are very vital to being able to actually get onto a friend team rather than skill itself. And at a certain point, you just can't ignore it anymore. So you better be aware of it sooner rather than later and be prepared to just resolve that conflict before you have it. I don't regret my time I've spent on competitive TF2. Not at all. It's given me most of my online friendships. It's allowed me to find multiple things that I'm very passionate over and given me a sense of direction for a lot of my life when there weren't really other things there. But I can't ignore the flaws that are present within the community that directly affect how much I can enjoy the game any longer. And I just don't think most people can once they're aware of these things either. And like I said before, even if you're not aware of these things, they're still going to affect you. Even if not you directly, they're going to affect a friend of yours or the person that you end up harming and inconveniencing due to that sort of lack of awareness. And ultimately, the lack of an ability to hold yourself and others accountable. A lot of the time, when it's not something that's directly bannable, be that most likely due to being outside of the immediate game and inside of a private space, you see those sort of harmful behaviors. The admins can't really hold them accountable. Their friends don't hold them accountable, they just keep going along with it. And the victims, a lot of the time, end up just being too uncomfortable or scared or just dejected to even approach and shine a light on it. And yeah, it just comes down to a lack of accountability. The admins can't always be the ones to hold them accountable. There are a lot of things due to how most leagues are managed and ran that results in there being large community things that they just can't manage. And, that's completely acceptable. Expected, rather. You can't really control people as community figures. Not outside of the league or community you foster anyways. And the people who have to do that are the people who are friends with that individual. It's your job to make sure that that individual sees the harm that they do and then distance yourself and stop making them feel welcomed within the community if they're unable to or refuse to recognize that. I don't think it's fair to ask anybody to just outright stop being friends with an individual or turn their backs on them, because that can just throw that person into so much more pain than they already might be in and entrench them on their sorts of negative behaviors because it might feel like all they really have left to do. But you definitely, at the very least, have to try and make themselves hold themselves accountable. At least a bit of the time, they have their own mental issues. They're human beings, but they just end up either not being aware of it or they think that it excuses their behavior. They don't fully understand the scope of it. And I think for a lot of those people, it's better to not have them in the community for a bit because they're just going to keep having that sort of negative feedback loop where they grow further into those habits. And those habits are accepted. It's just not good for them and it's not good for the community. And I think a lot of the time it's better for them to just take a step back and distance them from the community for a bit and hope to grow on their own. And a lot of these people, they'll get banned, they'll run into these issues, right? But they end up still being accepted by their friends. They end up not really getting punished by the community itself. And so all that really happens is that they just get distance from the community for a bit unless it's something like a permanent ban. And they aren't always going to grow from that. My point is, any action that community figures or staff take is always going to be rendered, not always, but a decent bit of the time it's going to be rendered invalid if people still treat them the same way. If they don't see any immediately out of game repercussions to their behavior. A fair bit of the time it's like, oh no, I got banned for this behavior in game. I'm just not gonna be able to play matches for a bit. Their friends still mostly treat them the same way and nothing ends up changing. When they come back, they say they've changed. They get back into the community groups, and then surprise, surprise, they haven't really changed because nothing around them has changed. All that's happened is that a bit of time has passed, and people have forgotten about the harm they did, and they go on to do more harm. And of course, not everybody does this. This is a bit of a generalization. But the same sort of sentiment still applies, that nothing changes unless people, the community itself, makes a change. Any attempt at long-term change is undead if the people within the community itself don't hold them accountable for it. And sadly, the community itself doesn't a lot of the time. In fact, they tend to do the opposite. They just double down on their behaviors. They double down in the defenses of their friend. And again, nothing changes. The set changes. The actors sometimes change, but everything else, all the tropes, the story, just stays the same. And there just isn't much point in to a community like that. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's just the way things are, the way things have to be, but I think there's always the chance for something better, and that it's just not a good status quo for things to stay at. I think something has to change, and I think that has to be the community members themselves. I don't really have anything else to say on this topic. I think I've offered about all the perspective I can. Of course, I have my own bias, and I've formed that bias through my experience. I'm not going to be, I'm not claiming that I've been fair all the time within my interactions with the community, but they've all been in reaction to something. In a community group, for instance, in something like a pub group, you get all this pressure from different sides when people don't get their way. You get all these people trying to push you in different ways, treating you like you aren't a human being. You're just some service to bow down to every women need. And the negativity just keeps coming and coming and never dissipates. It just keeps building up with every judgment call you have to make, with every mistake or even right decision you make, which is very subjective. The pressure mounts, and the people who do that, for the most part, like, they aren't bad people. They don't mean to harm, they just don't take a step back. It's just a game. It's just a community group. It's just a pub group. There's other sorts of rationalizations that happen. And even if it's not that significant itself, it really, really starts to build up. Especially once you see that especially once you start having genuine issues, like people raiding and DDoSing your server. And people just outgoingly harassing and causing harm to others within the groups. When everybody wants to get their way, the community ends up not getting its way, I guess is how I'd phrase it. And there's a degree of maturity in realizing that maybe this isn't the best for the community as a whole. Maybe this isn't best for the other people, even if it's best for my own little group or myself. I think that ability to just take a step back and recognize that is important for the well-being of any community. And I think it's all too lacking in the Team Fortress 2 community. And to finish what I was saying earlier, every time that you get that sort of pressure within the community, that you're put into that sort of position, or where you put yourself into that sort of position, your ends up being forced. You end up having to make a decision when everybody puts all this different pressure on you. And in the moment, you can't trust yourself to make the right decision because you're going to feel very biased against the sources of the issues or the people partaking in the issues. And you're going to end up feeling really bad over that and making a lot more subsequent mistakes due to that emotional vulnerability that ends up just imploding over time. And I to get to the point of having developed thought on community matters like this, going along with just having to being forced to take action, to have a perspective develop, it has to come from somewhere. And it's a simple concept of cause effect. This leads to this, right? So all of the negative things I've seen within the community, all of the ways it's hurt me personally, and the people I'm friends with personally, is why I get perspective like this that seems maybe biased or unfair or just super serious about it. And in all fairness, I think it is a serious topic, and I think a lot of people don't treat it appropriately for what it is. And disagree with that all you want, but it's my perspective, and I've developed it through my experiences, and I think my experiences are valid. I don't think that I can just ignore them or that they can just be ignored, nor that of others who have had similar experiences within the community. Point being, all of this comes from somewhere, and that somewhere is going to be different for everybody. but I think we can all meet at a common ground when we say that we don't want things to get to this point. We don't want others to have to feel this way about this thing that they're so passionate about, that they've spent so much time on. It's all real. I guess that's what I'm trying to say here, yeah. Real as it can get, whether you want to say it or not. Well, I am out of things to say now. I hope that maybe this can open up a healthier discussion on the matter, or really discussion in the first place, or just maybe open your eyes a little bit, change your perspective a little bit, I don't know, or just give you something to disagree with at the very least. Hopefully you find listening to me ramble on this at the very least like a bit entertaining. And yeah, I guess that's it. I think the lesson to be learned here is that all of these things have wider implications towards, well, obviously, other communities, be they competitive or just online in general. And I think probably to our lives as a whole. I think it is pretty explanatory towards just these social trends we see all too much today in general, especially online though. And maybe you can take some of this, break it down for yourself, and just reapply that perspective to other things you can see in life and view it through that framework. Being around some of the other people that do care in the community has been so pleasant. It's made the recent years of my life so much more enjoyable, just having those sorts of people who have had similar experiences, who can relate and who want to talk about this stuff and share perspective with, has been great. And I hope that everybody has teammates or friends like that within the community and in general to just make things a bit less stressful with. Those few gems are always going to, mentally at least, outweigh the negative sorts of experiences that you have, and it's really important to be able to focus on those positive influences and surround yourself with them and do what you can for them, be a positive influence for them in response. And that's how you'll see healthier communities and how you'll be able to actually enjoy your stay and place within the community. It's really nice to feel like you have a place like that, to have one of those few teams that just feels that genuine, that passionate, uh, and just have people who care about the game as anything besides just the game itself. I'm going to wrap things up now. To clarify, by moving on, I mean, I'm mostly just going to stick to my few small circles of friends and players that I trust, play on teams with them if I'm asked to for a few seasons until I get bored of that. I get how the lack of cohesion and repetition would probably makes this a lot less interesting to watch, but I feel like trying to tailor with it and just write a script and make this perfect just would take away from the message and the genuinity of it. I feel like a lot of content these days is just forced and acted all over and faked, and I feel like it ends up taking away from any actual significance of the content itself. I'll probably make a few more videos like this in the future on varying different topics. Anyways, some closing words. if you feel stressed or uncomfortable by how any of the things are in the community or in any community you're involved with in general, the best thing you can do is just speak up, be honest with yourself about it. Don't try and withhold out of fear of being judged or mocked or treated differently for your perspectives. There will always be people who appreciate it no matter what the perspective is. I think the more time you end up surrounding yourself with those sorts of negative influences, the more you see those behaviors as acceptable, and the more and more of your own sort of personality and identity, at least within the community, you lose. And if any of what I've said resonates you or you feel sadly over it, I just focus on the specifics of how you could fix it, not the fact that it exists and how it makes you feel sad or emotional or anything like that. When it comes to any of the splits and pauses, those are just bits of me collecting myself or thinking that I'm done and then finding out I have more to say, and that's just part of the package of letting it be natural, I guess, yeah.